Welcome to Happiness and the City. This is Barbara, and today I'd like to focus our attention on what is required in our communications, in our language, to counter communication hatred. And that is love of communication. Many people enter conversations or communications with other people not because they love communications, they love language, they love words, but because they want to express anger and hurt another person through that communication. But this can be completely transformed by attitude of love of words, love of communication, love of language, love of expression of ideas. So the way in which we can direct better emotions in communication is not to be in hatred, because that is a hateful way to deal with hatred. To deal with hatred, we have to have love. And the question is how to acquire that kind of love and how to apply it. And we have a huge tradition of philologia, love of logic. It's a body of science and knowledge that has accumulated over thousands of years. And in Europe, actually, when you study foreign languages and literatures, traditional name for that specialty was philologia, philologist, the love of logic. Logic meaning not only a systematic way of mathematical thinking, but logos. So logos has deeper meaning. That means language, reason, what can be expressed through language. I got the idea for thinking about this the other day in one of the local stores. A very friendly woman and a dog came, and the dog was very friendly to me. So I asked her what the dog's name, and then I realized the dog in all its awesomeness is unable to say its own name, and we can. So she said what the dog's name was, and then I realized how privileged we are as living beings, that we have that capacity of logos. Logos not only means thinking, but also expression of our thinking through language. So love of language, love of logos, love of reason is the foundation of any effort to create loving communications. Loving communication doesn't mean that people agree with each other over what they say, but the tone of that communication has that shared belief that we love logos, we love language. And the other great way to promote love in communications around matters of politics is wisdom. Traditionally, we call wisdom in the context of politics philosophia. Again, the word philo, love, of wisdom. Originally, philosophia, love of wisdom, was connected to the great story of King Solomon, who received spirit of wisdom from God. God asked him what he wanted most as a gift from God, and Solomon answered that he wanted wisdom. He didn't ask for money or for properties, but he asked for wisdom, and God gave him the spirit of wisdom. And because that spirit of wisdom came from God, wisdom, Sophia, naturally that kind of spirit of wisdom comes with God's love. So we have philosophia, love of wisdom. And today we need that love of wisdom more than at any time in the history of mankind, because the world became connected through internet, and diverse groups of people can create new ways of interacting with each other. But that will not happen without loving wisdom in ways and means of doing it. And we don't have much of it yet. We have some of it, but not that much yet. So I wanted us to think about application of philosophy to politics. Traditionally, it's called political philosophy. So, political love of wisdom. Today, a lot of you study it as political theory, but it really is the same thing, just different labels. In Wikipedia, there's a wonderful article on that topic. I'm looking at it right now. Let's look at it. And you see, political philosophy or political theory is the study of topics such as politics, liberty, justice, property, rights, law, and the enforcement of laws by authority. What they are, why, or even if they are needed, what, if anything, makes a government legitimate, what rights and freedoms it should protect and why, what form it should take and why, what the law is, and what duties citizens owe to a legitimate government, if any, and when it may be legitimately overthrown, and if ever. So you see here a very broad definition of what political philosophy can accomplish in giving us intellectual heritage on how those questions have been asked for thousands of years, how answers to those questions were created, and how to create ways to converse about those topics in ways that is peaceful. So this is one of the amazing ways in which we can learn from our heritage and then apply those ideas to contemporary matters and learn how to communicate with each other as great philosophers did. One of my great adventures in political philosophy happened when I was studying at Harvard University, and I was just so lucky to learn from some of the professors that became very famous promoting the idea of political philosophy. And that promotion of political philosophy was to teach us how to think about politics not only from the point of view of immediate needs, but to have that vast knowledge of how our ancestors dealt with similar problems and how to talk about very complex issues in a noble way, in a noble and beautiful way. And I think that today we need to recover that sense of chivalry in communications, the sense of nobility, the sense of beauty in language. So when you study those great books of political philosophy, you notice that topics like politics, liberty, justice, property, rights, law, and the enforcement of law, and laws which we call today authority, that those topics have vast legacy, and we don't have to look at some of the things that are happening today as if they just showed up and they were never discussed by our ancestors. One of the most important topics today is the question of enforcement of laws. I've been aware of huge conflict that is between some citizens and law enforcement authorities, and I think that accusing each other for being hateful is insufficient to solve the problem. The problems have to be looked upon from a very broad perspective of wisdom, how to solve those conflicts in a way that creates good relationships between all members of a given country, and how to create laws that are acceptable and that do not require severe measures of enforcement authority. In this particular definition, Wikipedia, authority is created as law enforcement, but authority is a much wider term in connection to political philosophy, because authority was created by the very fact that God calls himself king, running kingdom of God. So that's ultimate authority that not only enforces but also creates. And I think that today we have a very limited understanding of relationship between creation of laws and law enforcement. One of my professors at Harvard University had a father who taught in times where law school and government political science were connected, So any teaching and any education on law was always connected with political philosophy and political theory of law, and lawyers had to develop that creative ability of how to deal with laws. After the separation of the political philosophy from law and law enforcement, there seems to be a huge vacuum created about relationship between law enforcement and creativity of laws in the context of spirit of wisdom. That applies to many things in the government, because, for instance, certain things that were acceptable as laws 100 years ago are not acceptable today under completely new ways of thinking about relationships and relationship between a citizen and the government. We have developed a very powerful will of participation in governmental decision making that 100 years ago was not that strong. So any law enforcement has to understand that creative aspect of citizens' participation in authority. And the way to create a wise understanding of what the content of authority is, we have to involve all kinds of group in the will to create new ways of interaction that would be focused on peaceful coexistence. Because it is difficult to force people to agree on the same set of ideas. We come from different backgrounds, from different lineages, different countries, and especially in the United States of America, which is a vast empire. It started as 13 colonies, but today we are dealing with empires scanning the entire continent from sea to shining sea, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, with global reach and multinational corporations. So we have to think about enforcement of laws, authority in different ways than what that was acceptable 200 years ago. The nature of the population changed, the scale of the country changed, and the global influence became huge, powerful, and involving so many other nations, so many treasures from other nations, that we have to develop ways of thinking about authority from this current point of view. So we need to add creativity to the idea of law enforcement authority. I'll give you an example. When you have a certain law on the books and you see that a person is breaking that law, but if you arrest that person, the person will die from a heart attack, will you be willing to sacrifice that human being by this excessive stress, or would you be able to apply that particular breach of the law to a particular situation and out of wisdom and mercy let that person go, and that will avert that person going through extreme stress and losing his or her life. So I think we have to teach this in all law enforcement agencies. And I'm particularly talking about some situations in which a person broke a law, but then there was a very forceful law enforcement action. Weapons were used and the person died because of resistance to that enforcement. But we have to understand what is more important, the person's life or breach of some minor law. So we have to give that training to anyone in authority that is in a harmony with traditional understanding of Solomonic spirit of wisdom in application to authority. Because King Solomon obviously received authority from God, but with that authority he still needed spirit of wisdom in order to function in ways that would be pleasing to God and pleasing to those he ruled. So I think that in this very difficult situation of so much strife, so much blaming, and so much hate, we have to calmly restore thinking about how to create shared understanding of authority in ways that would be acceptable to all participants. In other words, in ways that are not partisan. A lot of discussion today is very partisan. Groups divided, attacking each other without any platforms in which they could share their ideas and create new ones. There are situations in which people have no way to agree, but that shared agreement can be created on a different level, in a different platform, in a different way. So this is what we need to create in the understanding of law enforcement authority, so that we know that law enforcement authority has wisdom. And the spirit of wisdom is very creative because it applies understanding to a particular situation in such a way that the best outcomes from everybody concerned is achieved. So I encourage you to read political philosophy. There's a lot of literature online in libraries. Of course, I encourage all to start with Plato, because it's so famous and so awesome. But obviously we have great philosophers in American tradition. We have Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote famous book Democracy in America, and he looked at what was happening in 19th century America from European perspective. We have the great Tsaritsa Catherine II, who became philosopher of politics herself and gave Russia amazing direction because of that. She was very well read in political philosophy. All founders of modern America, uh, we call them founding fathers of the United States of America, they were all educated in political philosophy. So I encourage all of you to look at love from the point of view of loving the tools of communication, like language, and then developing ways of connecting with other people who use the same tools. And then through that loving connection, there's chance that hearts will connect, and true agreements and true brotherly love and peace will be created. We have Philadelphia, the great city of brotherly love, as a symbol that that kind of connection can happen after people learn to communicate with each other lovingly, even if they disagree with what they say. So the medium of communication becomes the intercessor of peaceful ways to connect our minds and other knowledge, and develop ways that would create peace, coexistence, and affirmation of value of life of every human being on earth. Thank you so much for listening to this program, and see you here next week.